Hi, everyone. I wanted to start off today by introducing myself. My name is Ann Williamson. I'm an instructional specialist and the elementary ELD lead for the Multilingual Education Department in Denver Public Schools. Over the course of this past year, we've just heard loud and clear that teachers are looking for more support in making student communication and collaboration happen in a COVID world. Knowing this, I thought it'd be helpful to spend some time today just sharing how we've tried to problem solve for this seemingly widespread request for support. Here's our focus for this session. My hope is that you walk away with some strategies that you can share with the teachers in your school to increase the effectiveness of student talk fluidly across settings. When I say fluidly across settings, what I mean is that these strategies will work if you're teaching socially distanced in person, teaching in person and remote at the same time through live streaming technology and platforms, and/or teaching remotely. So we wanted to come up with strategies that focus on communication and collaboration and would work in all three of these scenarios. Teachers are dedicated to implementing student talk and they believe in the benefits. And it's so easy to get lost in the plethora of online learning platforms. So the following ideas I'm going to present to you are all based in Google Slides because we wanted to ensure that our solutions for student communication and collaboration were in a platform that everyone had access to in order to make these the most effective and greatest impact. So to show you these strategies, I'm going to come out of present mode so you can see more closely how you would utilize these with kids. Alrighty, so one of the strategies that we figured out how to do in Google Slides is jot thoughts. So on the slide, the teachers would input the question, as you can see up here is the prompt, and then the directions for the activity and the language supports off to the side. So in this example, the teacher is prompting students to describe characters in stone soup. So these colored boxes that you see on the slide and off to the side essentially are text boxes that we made look like sticky notes by just filling them in with color. One thing that I like about this is it helps teachers specify their expectations for time and turns. So how many times students need to contribute during an activity, perhaps by asking them to share, one sticky note each or, two each of a specific color or whatever. By presenting this slide outside, right, you can use all this extra space on the outside to help clarify these expectations for kids. Here's another one, a virtual jot thoughts that what it looks like in the 4th unit of visual arts, comparing and contrasting characters in Peter and the Wolf. So here you can see both the language supports and the picture supports. Again, either students would type their responses or the teacher would type their responses on the sticky notes, and then they drag and drop them onto the board. You can see here that Control D is the shortcut key for duplicating. So if one student was assigned this color and I wanted that student to respond 3 times, I would Control D. And if I wanted to prepare that ahead of time for kids to regulate time and turns, I could do it that way. This is another example of how a teacher might use collaborative structures in Google Slides. So teachers can use these same sticky notes that we've been talking about in jot thoughts to describe an image relevant to the lesson about habitats, for example. So in this, students are describing grasslands. Teachers could provide the question up here and prompt them to describe what they see in the grasslands or the elements that they know are there. And then the pair could take turns labeling different parts of the grassland. So, and then hopefully, obviously using the mortar over here. So the student might say, the branches provide shade, for the ground, right? And then this person would talk about the root systems, or they could, instead of purpose of the different elements in the habitat, they could also, maybe they're using prepositions and describing where you find them. So essentially in this, you go back and forth between student A and student B, and you're just labeling the different parts of the poster virtually. I like this activity in this structure for classifying and categorizing. So In this activity, kids would categorize the different language depending on the most appropriate audience for that language. I really like this because it helps build that idea of metalinguistic awareness and pragmatics. So each student would be assigned a certain amount of turns based on the number of phrases or text boxes that they have. Obviously here, it's just one turn per kid. So for example, student A would begin and might say, I use the language, what's up, with my friends to greet my friends, because it's a more informal way of saying hello, right? And then it would be person B's turn to sort what audience they would use that greeting language in and what language frame that they would use to be able to do that. Here's another example of a talking chip strategy that students could and teachers could use. What I like about this one too is it's helpful with little kids. So you would just prepare the talking chip ahead of time, just like we're used to using in the classroom. And then as students respond to all of the different prompts, they would drag their talking chip onto the table, obviously with your language supports and your prompt on there. This one is really neat because it's essentially a 4 corners activity. So you'd put the student names on talking chips ahead of time, and then they would drag and drop their name into the essentially virtual corner to which they have their response for the question. So they could use some of these language frames here. I've also seen teachers link this to a breakout room so that all the students who disagree, for instance, all go into a breakout room, or you could link the disagree and the agree, or the strongly disagree and the strongly agree, or any combination of these into the breakout room and have them do an event. But it's a nice visual, I think, for 4 corners. Students can also use talking chips to play virtual tic-tac-toe. So in order to place their talking chip on a square, this would be pre-filled with language or images, for instance. And then obviously kids win when they're able to get the 3 in a row, vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. So this is what it might look like for with the language frames in there. I'll give you a moment to look at that. A student might say, the wolf blew down both the first and second little pig's house, right? And then this student or the other team might say, unlike his siblings, the third little pig built a house that the wolf could not blow down, right? And so they essentially just go back and forth using these frames, trying to get 3 in a row. What I like about this is it pushes kids to use different language that they may or may not feel more comfortable with. And so ideally, they get more practice and more flexibility with more complex language frames. So they have to do that in order to win. This is what it might look like for, instead of putting words on tic-tac-toe, for the images. So kids would take turns describing, the different images. And this is obviously for the EL Achieve Weather Unit. So that's what it would look like there. Here's an example of still same thing, tic-tac-toe and using talking chips, but this teacher has really tried to build on this compare and contrast language with a different topic, right? And really providing them extra practice to increase their fluency, to make the language of ELD portable to other settings. And here we have an example of talking chips with cause and effect language to explain events in the book, David Goes to School by David Shannon. So obviously this is another example, as is this, of teachers using the virtual tic-tac-toe strategy to increase student engagement and student talk, making the language of ELD portable outside of the ELD classroom. Here is similar to Jot Thoughts. Kids would describe the different pictures of the story that they're reading with the cause and effect language, and teachers or students could type their name and their response up there, or just their name, depending on how much time they have. You guys recognize this. This is the EL Achieve board game that they provided for us in a virtual manner. This is an example of a teacher using or really building on students' knowledge of shades of meaning, which we know are so critical for comprehension and inferring. as students get older and more complex text. So here are your word cards, obviously, and you would order those and send those to the back as you went through. So the beauty of these routines is we can build language expectations into the student roles. So here's an example of a fan and pick routine. If students are given the language supports to respond, paraphrase, and give feedback, then we're putting the onus of the language on our kids. So here's an example of what it might look like to do a virtual fan and pick and the language they would need to do that activity. Now, let's take a minute and just think about some different low-tech methods to boost student engagement through technology. Students can keep their microphone on mute and practice the language aloud. What I like about this one is it allows for 100% participation and gives them the time to think and to speak and helps lower that affective filter before asking students to share out. Teachers can then check for understanding of a learning task and model target language by asking 2 students to unmute and model responding to the question and providing feedback to the response. Students can use gestures to participate in the lesson and respond to one another, such as thumb up or thumb to the side if they disagree. For example, when one student unmutes, the other student can provide feedback through gestures. And what I like about this too is it's also 100% participation. Students can also respond, as you guys know, to the teacher and to each other in the chat box. And there are a few cooperative learning routines that I wanted to touch on with you guys that are lower tech options as well. So for example, fist to 5. In this structure, the teacher or the student poses the statement or response and the students raise their fingers from fist or 0 to 5, indicating their position. So maybe their agreement or how comfortable they feel with the topic. Students can be paired with opposite opinions to discuss in whole group. In a remote setting, students can also enter their number in the chat box. So their fist to 5 can be done virtually that way as well. This structure can easily be facilitated in a social distance setting where students are 3 feet or 6 feet apart or in live streaming as well. Another lower tech collaborative structure is Show Me. So in this structure, the teacher poses a question and the students write it on a whiteboard, a paper, a digital document. The teacher says, show me, and students hold up their answer. In remote environments, students write down on a piece of paper and show them that way. And don't forget takeoff touchdown. In this structure, the teacher makes a statement, the students stand up if they agree or sit down if they don't agree. And this is nice for our kids who are getting squirmy from looking at a computer screen, or teachers are getting squirmy for that answer. Kids can also give a thumb up or a thumb to the side if sitting or standing proves to be too difficult remotely. And lastly, we can still do whip arounds. Students can respond to each other's questions through gestures or in the chat box. So in summary, we want to make sure that we're still using those collaborative structures, choosing the ones that fit our purpose best, making sure our kids have tons of supports to structure that conversation just like we would in the classroom. And then making sure we're modeling it and practicing it, especially virtually in that whole group setting and fishbowling it before we begin. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and I hope you've been able to think of some new ways and envision new ways in which you can share this with teachers and help kids engage more online.